Hello, Rob from Fountain Pen Journey. Today I am going to talk about some inks. Now, everyone at the moment seems to be in the fountain pen world going absolutely crazy for really unusual inks, sheening inks, shimmering inks, things like that. And whilst I do love them, recently I've actually been using a few inks which, in all honesty, have kind of made me go, oh, these are a bit unsaturated. But I've really started to like using unsaturated inks. I mean, as far as ink brands go, one of my absolute favourite brands is Diamine, and their inks are usually fairly saturated. I also love the Pilot Iroshizuku inks, and these are also honestly quite deeply saturated inks. But I'm going to demonstrate some inks today which are some interesting colours, but they don't have that level of heavy saturation. So let's get on with it. First off, I'm going to go with a Pure Pens ink. Now this is Pure Pens Castell Coch. So it's the colour of the interior of the Welsh castle in Wales, Castell Coch. Which translates as Red Castle in Welsh. So let's just have a look at the ink. So it's a pinkish red, and quite honestly, all I can say is it's a decent wetness, everything else. It writes really well. But as you can see, it is not a very deeply saturated ink. This ink, I believe, is, in my opinion, very similar in colour to Lamy Red, but it's much nicer. It's not as dry. This is made by Diamine here in the UK, and it does a really nice job. If you're after a reddish pink or pinkish red ink that isn't saturated, then this is the one. I mean, I love a nice, rich, bright red ink, such as my two favourite red inks are Waterman Audacious Red, and what's the other one? Oh, that's typical. I'm showing my age now. It's gone completely. Schaefer Script Red, Classic Red, which are really, really bright red inks. But this is not one of those. This is really, really, really good pinkish red, and it's even coming out a little bit too red on this Rhodia paper. So that's the first one. If you've got any questions, pop a comment down below about any of these inks, and I'll try to answer them. Let's go with this. Oh, writing down the pen name now. Sorry about that. I'll start again. Write it down so you can actually read it rather than my chicken scratch cursive. Right, J. Herbin Vert de Gris. Green grey, basically, from J. Herbin. And it is, in my opinion, one of the nicest coloured inks. It's a little bit on the dry side, and it is a grey green. This medium nib, this Monte Lovis Bordus fountain pen, is quite broad, but in a fine nibbed fountain pen, this ink is a really, really amazing colour. I really love it. But it really isn't a very saturated ink at all. I mean, if I go on thick, yeah, it's very dark, but if I go a little bit less, it's a good colour, not deeply saturated, well behaved ink. So that is another good one. I'm going to compare that with this next one. Now, I don't know anything about this particular ink. It's from Beaufort Inks here in the UK. And this is a fine nib, which I believe is showing up really how unsaturated this particular ink is. So Beaufort Inks Scots Pine. Now, I have been looking for the perfect green ink for me for a very, very, very long time. And I thought, just from the sound of this ink, the name, I will give it a go. And quite honestly, I'm really impressed by it. It's a very, very nice pine green ink. It's not olive green, it's not dark green, it's not a muddy green. It's a really, really attractive pine, fir tree coloured ink. I think it's a really, really good colour, and it is very unsaturated, and it does a really, really good job. So if you're after a reasonably unsaturated, lighter green bordering towards teal ink, then this is a really excellent colour. I love this ink very, very much. It is available in bottles and cartridges. So let's just have a look at these inks before we move on. There's the Beaufort Ink Scots Pine. Really nice colour. None of these inks have any shading, well, sheening or shimmer. They're just basic shading inks. And you can see that this is a really, really nice green colour. The Herbin Vert, which now, to be honest, close up looks more saturated than it really is in real life. That's coming out as quite a darkish blue, but it really isn't that colour. And the Pure Pens Castell Coch, which is a nice pinkish red. These bits here, they are looking much, much redder than it is in real life. That is a much more representative, the smear of the actual colour of this pinkish red ink. So let's do the next two. And I will talk about this one here because I've got yet another Herbin ink. What am I doing? Sorry about that. Write the name of the ink here. Herbin Diabolo Menthe, which translates as peppermint, and it is a peppermint ink. This nib is a broad buck nib. Now you can see, wow, that is really not saturated at all. That smear has basically taken away all of the colour out of the little hashtag crosshatch, whatever you want to call it. And it's a really nice colour. Very, very summery, bright, almost like a felt tip sort of colour, really. And it's really attractive, but very, very unsaturated. I should imagine that in anything other than a medium, any finer than a medium nib, this is going to start to look quite washed out. But in a broad nib, really, really good colour. And it's very, very wet, as you can see from the smear, and it goes down very well. But it is not a very saturated colour at all. So I'll just do that crosshatch again. You can see there. Do it again and gone. So there is Diabolo Menthe, Peppermint. So yeah, another unsaturated ink from Herbin, and some of their inks are really unsaturated. There is also Herbin Ambre de Burmese amber, which is it's just an amber coloured, really light ink, unusable in my mind, but some people do like those sort of things. I prefer more saturated oranges. So Herbin, always worth considering if you are on the lookout for a less saturated ink. They do have one or two which aren't very saturated at all, such as this. I mean, even the camera's beginning to struggle to focus on that because there is very little contrast there. So final unsaturated ink, which I've been experimenting with in different pens, is this one here. Now, this is in a Diplomat Aero with a broad steel nib. So it's a Noodler's ink, and its official title is The Blue-Nosed Bear. Now, this nib on this pen is absolutely excellent. Really broad, really smooth, great writer. I have been using the Noodler's Blue-Nosed Bear in a Bauer 308. I did a review of that recently, did a few fills, and it's great. It's really unsaturated, and that has a medium nib. In this broader nib, this is coming out a lot more saturated, but it isn't a massively saturated ink, especially not for Noodlers. As you can see, that, I mean, it's a wettish, for Noodlers I'd say it's a dry ink, but in this broad nib it's wet. But even then, you can see crosshatch just smears away, just disappears to almost nothing there. And it isn't, I mean, I would say that in a medium nib this is an icy blue ink, but even in this broad nib it isn't very saturated at all. So let's carry on with this just before I round up a bit more about the blue-nosed bear, because I do have an observation to make as well. So as you can see, not hugely saturated. Really isn't doing an awful lot of stuff there. Do a little bit of faster squiggling so you get an impression of what this is like. So there you go. Not a great deal of saturation in that, even with this really wet broad nib. One thing I will say about this Noodler's Blue-Nosed Bear ink is it's the first Noodler's ink that I've had which actually feathers really quite badly. This is Rhodia paper. I'm going to see if I can... It's actually behaved really quite well on this, but on some other really smooth papers, the Oxford campus notebooks that I reviewed recently, I've used it on that medium nib. It feathers a bit. With this broad nib, it really feathers quite badly, which is unusual for a Noodler's ink, from my own opinion, experience. So there we have it. We have a selection of inks that, in my view, I mean, you've got a range of colours here, are unsaturated, still attractive colours, and honestly don't have that contrasty punchiness, is the best way it's the best way I can describe it, that you get with many of the inks that we're quite used to using and enjoying using these days. So hope you found that this video was interesting and useful. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Bye.